G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for another late night review of our loss to Port in what was a really mixed bag when weighing up the positives and the negatives. For tonight's review, I'll be covering a brief overview of the loss, who the best players were, including promising performances from our emerging stars and just general new player watch. I know that we can't quite call them debutants, but there's a couple of guys that are pretty close to that. And then finally, my key takeaways from the match. So to start us off, I'm going to quote many people over the years and say it really was a game of two halves. In the first quarter especially, we came out of the gates completely in control of the game at all areas. Not saying that statistically they didn't have a few going their way, just in case someone pulls up a stat, but it did look like we basically controlled all the important stuff. And I did hear the commentators make a good point, which was that we were constantly controlling possession, which isn't our normal style. And it kind of plays into the general observations that I made over the weekend that West Coast were holding a few cards up our sleeves. So in case anyone missed my waffle review last night, I did mention that it looked like West Coast were going to make some late changes to the final squad today. In fact, I think that was the headline of the waffle video, if you haven't viewed it yet, which we did. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back there and say that we're clearly aware that Jack Graham's impending suspension, as well as Liam Ryan's question marks from soreness, were coming, and we prepared for that. I know we held the lead at half-time and we still looked really impressive in the second quarter, but realistically, it really did look like Port were slowly wearing us down over the course of the rest of the match after that early burst. And I was really surprised in the end where it looked like our fitness ran out at some point halfway through the third quarter, even though Port had lost Rosie and I believe Alir was apparently playing injured. They kept mentioning his knee. So I guess now that I've got hindsight from the game, it probably makes a bit of sense with the age of the side out there today, which is probably a good thing because it speaks just to improvement as all the guys who performed well for us today continue to build that base of AFL fitness that you just can't gain in a single pre-season. My best player tonight is probably a little outside the umpires' votes, but I could not look past the impact that Harry Edwards had on the final result. He was reading the ball unbelievably well and finished with an absolutely insane 11 marks and 12 intercept possessions in total. He actually got a mention in my waffle review last night also, just when I was talking about how well our key defence stocks have risen just to the challenge without Govan Barras. And then tonight he's gone up yet another gear once again after that. So he also went at a disposal efficiency of 82% from his 17 disposals. So all in all, I'm handing him my club votes from tonight's loss as our best player. Next best for me was Liam Baker with another of his non-quantity efforts. He might not have racked up the disposal count that he normally gets, but he spent a lot of time up forward, which explains a bit of that, and did a heap of damage with his 18 disposals, which he capped off with a goal. Harley Reid could arguably be holding the title of our best for us tonight if you were purely measuring the game off his stat sheets. So he was our highest possession winner with 26 disposals, and he did add a goal on top of that. And I think there were two that almost were goals. In fact, there was one that was paid a goal that was touched afterwards, and they picked up on it. He did a lot of damage with the ball in hands too, but I just couldn't bring myself to put him higher than our top three because he does do a lot of stuff to undo his hard work, which I have mentioned in these reviews before. That said, he was in everything, and that included a massive 7 tackles as well. So, as I'm sure everyone can see, the makings of him really having perfect games are there. I just think he's going to benefit from having star players around him, which we'll probably have to wait until next year as those current emerging stars get better, and hopefully Elliot Yeo returns too. I'm sure he will. After that top three, I thought Clay Hall, Tom McCarthy, Tyrell Dewar, and Matt Flynn were all in our best also. Hall finished with 21 disposals, which I kind of expected after Graham and Ryan were withdrawn late. Remember, Ryan's been doing a lot of midfield time, meaning a guy like Hall was inevitably going to get to play pure midfield minutes all night, which is exactly what his role should be. While McCarthy was reliable for us again, just his 4th game of footy, which is nuts. Dewar looked as good as his best this year. He really had a great ability to generate ball movement with his run. He also hurt Port quite a lot just during that first half when we got on top of them. In fact, I think he had a really large hand in that. But his hand passing as well. Some of those balls that he gets out of the centre of those packs, you wouldn't think that he's a contested mid, which he isn't. But he can really hit targets about maybe 20 metres, really sweet with a hand pass from inside, which I think I saw a couple of times, and it really set up some good plays. Flynn, I think, did beat Jordan Sweet for overall impact today. He had more of the footy comparable hitouts when you adjust the number of ruck contests, just because him and Bailey Williams do a more even spread than most. And he finished with a really handy goal that was part of that early rush we got on Port. Like I keep saying with Flynn, we're not measuring expectation for someone who should be having the same impact as Matt Gawn. We're measuring a guy who came to our club for free as an unrestricted free agent while we were desperate in our ruck stocks, and he has continued to get a little bit better every week this year, which I do keep saying, and he keeps us from getting absolutely bent over every week by some of the elite rucks of the competition. Obviously, I think Jared Witts was probably the one that really got a hold of him. So I've consistently been really happy with Flynn's output myself personally. I do know that he's can be polarising with some fans, but I'm not on the other side of that fence. Aside from the list of best players, that drops off pretty sharply after those guys, but there were some promising performances from a couple of our newest guys out there. Jobe Shanahan, again, looks like a Rolls Royce of a forward. He's got such good timing, reach and finish, and he did almost everything right with the opportunities that he got up forward, finishing with that goal. Malachi Champion, I'm also stoked with. I do know McWalter mentioned his fitness isn't quite AFL ready, which I never really noticed from his waffle matches, but it is hard to get a gauge on stuff like that because you really don't have any insight, and you've got those 2 cameras that they're going to give you available for waffle matches. But they did sub him out pretty early, so I'm sure they know best just running off his GPS numbers. He's lightning fast. I haven't seen him make a single bad decision in his first 2 games, and that's exactly the same as he was in the waffle. He's an incredibly good decision maker. And the way he's going, I just hope we let him build his fitness base while he's out there playing, because the impact he has with his minutes on the field is really high from what I'm seeing and where I'm sitting anyway. Other than those names, though, that pretty much brings me to my key takeaways. And my first key takeaway from tonight's loss was that the age and experience of our list was really competing with the talent we clearly now have in our side, and then the familiarity that everybody's starting to get with the new game plan. So I know that statement's probably a little bit convoluted or not decisively finished to follow, but the point is positive in that those periods of footy that we're able to get on top of sides with really shows that we have the talent and we're playing a winning game plan, but we just need to have the patience to give these kids time to just get to a point where they iron out those little mistakes and just build the fitness and conditioning that they're going to need long term. By next year, though, I do expect us to have a much better side and off the bottom of the ladder too. So keep an eye out for, I think, Carlton and Melbourne in the next few years for that badge. I think they're the ones that are headed on a downward trajectory. My other key takeaway is that I think we landed picks 1 and 2 this weekend in probably as good a form that you could possibly ask for, because Richmond managed to get the better of the human remains that is the Essendon Bombers. While we came close with Port, the loss to Port pretty much puts the wooden spoon in our hands because it didn't really get us over the line for the 4 points. So between now and the end of the year, we just have enough time to end the season with a few late wins, which hopefully starts with Richmond at home next week. And that pretty much wraps up my weekend of West Coast reviews. As always, if you're still watching and haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And not only will you get more content like tonight's AFL review, but I also put out weekly waffle reviews. There's a bye next weekend, so don't expect it next weekend. And those reviews do generally have a pretty good track record for predicting what we're going to do in the AFL side. So hopefully, if you're not as invested in the waffle side as some fans, it still has something to offer. Otherwise, as always, thank you for tuning in and watching, and hopefully I'll see you all again for just the AFL review next weekend against Richmond. Cheers until then.